Jumbo, everybody, Jumbo Karibu. Welcome to Jumbo Dr. Akumbu podcast. Today, my guest is Reverend Dr. B. Keith Haney, originally from Fort Dodge, Iowa, and has been an ordained pastor for 28 years. Currently, Reverend Haney is the assistant to the President for Missions, Human Care, and Stewardship. He is dedicated to healing racial divides and has authored a Bible study titled One Nation Under God Healing Racial Divides. Engage with us as we embark on this wonderful journey based on his dissertation that he completed on change management in the church. Now let's welcome Reverend Dr. Haney. Jumbo, Reverend Dr. Haney.
Jumbo to you as well. Good to see you as well. We haven't talked to you in a while. Looking forward to our conversation.
Wonderful, wonderful. I am excited and I am really privileged to have you. You are a very unique guest and I am very honored to have you today. So I do this little game that where I ask all my guests what their name is, and I know your name, what your name stands for. Is there anything special about your name? Is there something about your name that you really, really love?
So I looked up my name because I'm always curious. My mom was a big fan growing up of Brian Keats, who was an actor on the show Family Affair. So she kind of put my name together. Byron Keats versus Brian Keith. That was his name. But actually, I didn't realize it, but Byron is Irish, and it means basically son of O'Brien. So it's not really all that exciting of a name. But I also discovered I did my ancestry.com that I am 3% Irish. So I don't think she knew that when she named me Byron, but it's an Irish name, and it's my last part of my name is also Irish. So who knows? Maybe she had a deep understanding of what the Irish means.
Right. So sometimes, spiritual, those that are in the spirituality fair, it's that belief that our ancestors are with us. So
Yeah.
3% was like, you're not forgetting me.
That's right.
You might look like you just came from the coast of Africa, but no way, you're not gonna forget me. I am right here.
That's right. Exactly.
So if 3% is that, what is the rest? Do you mind if I ask?
So the majority of my background is Nigerian.
Oh,
Um,
amazing.
yeah, and a little bit of Bantu, I believe, is another part of it. So West Africa. So yeah, it's a mixture, and 3% German. So
That's amazing.
it works out interesting to be at a mostly German church body. So
Right. That is wonderful. You're in a German church, buddy.
yeah,
Oh, interesting. Say more.
yeah. So the LCMS is mostly German. It came from Germany, migrated to get over to the United States to have more religious freedom. So there was a big push to find a place where they could relocate Lutheranism to America, and so there was some initial people came over, settled in the Missouri area, and formed a Senate and church body. And at first, they were very, very missional denomination. They were really spreading quite quickly as the Germans came over to America. They suffered a little bit of anxiety during the war when Hitler was rising. And so a lot of our churches in America spoke German and had all the services in German until the Hitler incident happened. Then they started trying to transition because people were a little suspicious of this German speaking church body in America. So they started migrating to English, and less of them were doing German only services. So there was an actual district founded. The English district was where they were starting English speaking Lutheran churches to kind of spread the gospel more. So a little bit of a history of the LCMS.
That is amazing. That is amazing. And you are the reverend in that ministry, correct?
Right.
Okay. Amazing. It's fascinating how small things like that connect us. Like
Yes.
I always say that we as humans, we're more alike than we're different. We're more connected than we think. Just because, how do we go from a 3% German to you being in a German church, right? There's always that something there that connects us. So I don't take anything about life as a standalone, as a
Right.
coincidence, right? Like
Right.
I believe that we're so interconnected that no matter how small the link is, there can be a lot of purpose that comes from there. Given that you're 3% Irish, 3% German, and more Bantu and all of that, I have to ask, have you been on the continent? Have you been to the West Africa?
No, I have not been there yet. So it's one of those things I'd love to do at some point.
Hmm. Okay, so you've got me, and we need to make that happen. You
Okay.
can connect with your 3% and not with your higher
Right.
percentage. We gotta change that. We gotta change that.
That's funny.
That is so wonderful. It's really a pleasure to learn more about you and to have this little background. I'm sure our guests appreciate these little things that are special about us.
Yes,
So
definitely.
we connected because I saw your dissertation and I really fell in love with the work that you've done for your doctorate program and or through your doctorate program. And I really think that my guests would love to hear about this. So um, I do have a Christian background, and I do still come from Africa, and I do understand how religion can really tie into things, and how the church itself has been involved in some things in our past that are not often pleasant. And a school of thought that believe that change management is not something that is reserved for businesses. Our world is constantly changing. Our cultures are constantly changing. Even us as human, we're constantly changing and growing. And change is a very, very, very hard thing. And but the church is a very, very structured thing. So the one of my struggles over the George Floyd crisis, one of my difficulties was the response of the church. The response of the church for me was more, we're praying for you. Just give it up to Christ. I understand that, but I understand just praying for somebody and just comforting somebody. But there are things that we can do more in the church that is more inclusive, that is more, that makes the other person that is hurting feel like they actually belong to a body. So the leadership structures of the church, I felt, was not organized in a way or managed in a way that supports an understanding of how to support maybe people of color in the church, maybe just different changes. It doesn't have to be this diversity of groups kind of a change, but any other change that is in the church. I It's my personal opinion, so I might be wrong, that our churches are not very flexible with change within the bounds of the word, right? I am not one of those people that advocate for change just for the sake of change. I advocate for change within the bounds of the word, because that is a whole culture of itself, and we need to be respectful of the culture of the church. We can't be careless with how we expect change in the church, or require change in the church, because that is a culture. Yes, there are things that could change, but it needs to be within that construct of Christianity and a Jesus-based Christianity that is grounded in love. That said, what prompted you to do research on change management in the church?
So, what to go back to your initial point about George Floyd is interesting because I wrote a Bible study on race in America, and it kind of lay dormant because when I wrote it, it was during the Michael Brown incident in St. Louis. If you remember way back, the Michael Brown thing that kind of launched
Yes,
the
yes,
controversy. But during the George Floyd era, the Bible study really took off, and churches started asking the question, how can we have the conversation about race in a positive way? And so I got a lot of people and churches contacting me saying, what can we do to have this conversation? And so I got a chance to see the other side of it where churches really were wrestling with the race thing. Um, and it's hard because I think knowing how my church body functions, which is mostly white, um, there was a real concern as to how do we honor what's going on and support that without feeling guilty and taking responsibility for things that we had no responsibility for. And so you had the church trying to, how do we speak truth and gospel and light into a situation that's very dark without making our members who don't want to deal with it feel guilty? So that was kind of that tension of how do we do that? Whenever the church is trying to go through change, you made a really key point, and the key point is you never change the gospel message. That never changes. That's an unchangeable message. What we try to change is how do we change the structure or the organization so that it can effectively communicate the gospel to the generation around it. And so in my study, I was trying to figure out, knowing the church doesn't like business models because they don't trust business models, but we
right.
can learn a lot from business. And so I actually started changing some of the terminology of Cotter to make it more churchy. So Cotter's first initial stage of change is create a sense of urgency. Um, what I decided to change that to was holy discontent. And that's that place where you feel that the brokenness around you is something that you as a church need to address, and you feel that compelled by the Spirit to join God and the work that He's doing to transform the brokenness around you. I think the church can better relate to that, creating urgency, than saying urgency.
Right.
And so I tried to give them terms that they could connect with, because until the church feels the need that we have to move from where we are to make a radical shift, we're not going to. Oftentimes we start with vision and say, oh, if we have a big enough vision, then people will join us in that vision. Well, it's like, that's not typically how it works. And vision
And
alone doesn't have the energy and the structure to sustain itself. I spent 30 years in the church trying to use vision to drive a church, and it just didn't work. That's like there's something missing. Either people didn't believe it yet, or it just wasn't enough of a factor that made them uncomfortable to say it's more important to accomplish this vision than to stay where we are.
and I think for me that was the pull. That was the pull. As this is fascinating work because I haven't seen Carter used like that, and that struggle of making ideas from the business world make sense in the church without diluting the ministry itself. Right? Was
Right.
fine line for me showed how experienced you were and how in tuned you were with the struggle of the church. And for me, that was the pull. So you've hit one. Can you give us a little bit more of the quarter steps? Which are the steps that really stood out for you? Because that's just one that you just gave us,
Right.
right?
So Cotter's second step is recruiting a change team. In the church, it's important, in my experience, that your change team be a diverse team. And when I say diverse, I'm not talking about diverse in terms of DEI, but diverse in terms of skills, in terms of gender, in terms of the different gifts that they bring to the table. Diverse in the fact that they're going to connect with different people in your church in different ways. You need a group of people who see where you're going and are part of the initial stage of the vision, from those different backgrounds, because you have to hit every different aspect of the church in different ways. And so by having a diverse team, you improve your ability to implement that change in the congregation. I also changed Scotter's third step, the terminology, because we don't really understand vision well, and strategic vision in church really doesn't resonate often with people. So I describe it as, can you define your trophy for the church? And I use the example of, for those people who like sports, and I was in Chicago for 12 years. And so the Chicago Cubs had lost for 105 years without winning a world championship. They brought in a new general manager, a new coach, and he said, our trophy is to win the World Series. And he told the entire city of Chicago, how we're going to do this, we're going to get rid of all these players who are old and expiring contracts, and we're going to lose 100 games for about 3 to 4 years. We're going to draft well, and then when we get close, we're going to get the people we need to get us over the top. If you were to ask anybody in Chicago who was a sports fan, what was the Cubs' vision, they would tell you to win a World Series. That's their trophy. And if you asked them how they're going to get there, they could tell you what the plan was. When I go into churches, oftentimes no one knows what the trophy is, and no one knows how to get there. So my thought was, if you're going to have a vision, it needs to be so crystal clear that everybody in church knows what it is. And everybody in church can define what it's going to take to get you there. If you don't have that kind of vision driving your church, change is going to be really difficult for you, because you don't understand you don't know how to count the cost of it.
Correct.
And then Cotter's next step is communicate the vision. And that's really the key for the church a lot. And for everyone, but particularly for the church, is how do you communicate that vision over and over and over again, and in creative ways? Some people did a really great job of doing it with sermon series, did it with stories, they did it with podcasts, they did it with every single means necessary to get the vision communicated to everybody in the church. So I think the ones who effectively do it find multiple ways to communicate the vision, and you communicate it over and over and over again until you get sick of hearing it yourself. And then you still go, because then you're getting it, but then somebody still doesn't get what the vision is. So you can never communicate that enough.
Right.
Cotter's next step is identify those barriers to change. Now, I actually did that at several different points in the Cotter process. I did it at the beginning, because if you don't identify in the beginning what are the hurdles and what are the concerns, you're going to miss some things that may derail you in the beginning. So I tested early on in Cotter's model. What are the barriers? How are you defining the threats and also the opportunities to your leadership? Then at this stage, also go back again. Now that you've started the process, what new barriers or challenges have arisen in your process? Because you got to deal with those at every single stage of the process, or you'll get derailed by those things. When you get to that point, then you start getting to what Cotter calls the establishing stage. I call the producing the fruit stage for the church. And that's where you start to see the short-term wins and the goals that you've set aside. And you start to celebrate those wins with the congregation. This is where it's really critical that the leadership shares the stories of the change process, share the stories of lives that have been impacted by your change. And you highlight those through personal testimonies, through stories, through newsletter articles. It's like, this is why we're doing this, because see, this life was impacted because we went through this process. And these are the people that what we're doing as a church is impacting. You would be surprised how many people do not know what their church is doing in the positive. All they hear are what they come on Sunday morning. If you don't tell them on Sunday morning the impact your church is having, they go, we don't do anything. We just come to church, we go home. So it's important to share those stories with your people. Go, oh, I belong to a church that just connected with this young family who was struggling, and we gave them food, and to celebrate, not that you're lifting yourself up, but this is what God is doing in the church. And it goes back to the book of Acts. The book of Acts was just an entire book of, this is what the church is doing as a Christian movement gets started. And we don't do enough of that Acts kind of testimony of this is God at work through us, and the church needs to hear that. And then stage 7 is really the sustaining stage or accelerating stage. This is where if the change is going to become embedded, you're now moving beyond and you're dealing with organizational structures and changes to make sure your organization is in line with the change, because the next step is when the culture actually has changed. And I call that the flourishing stage. That's where you begin to see the new ministries that develop because of the changes you've made, the lives you're impacting. And now the church has turned a corner and they've made the shift to be the kind of organization that's going to go back to that first thing of the holy discontent. We saw the brokenness, we saw the pain that moved us to do something, and here's the results of what we're doing to impact the brokenness in our community.
That is joyous. For somebody that teaches Carter model, like it's very uplifting to see and hear Carter in this light, and how beautifully you make it fit in the church without diluting both Carter and
Right.
and the Bible, right?
Right,
You got
exactly.
really neatly, like a very fine fit right here. And so you use this model for your research. So what was this research and why did you choose to do it?
Because I've been trying to work through change in churches, because my history as a pastor is I've walked into 4 different situations where the church I was pastoring was either in crisis or getting into crisis. They were at risk churches that were in the middle of a transformation. And they said, we called you as a pastor to fix this. I'm like, whoa, wait, that's not, that was what wasn't my training. I didn't know how to fix this. So I had
Right.
to kind of learn on the fly things that worked and didn't work. And it was frustrating because the first time I tried, I went in and said, okay, I'm going to come back with a vision for you. And I went off and prayed about it. And I came back and said, here's the vision. We're going to be the largest Black Lutheran church in the city of Detroit.
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I watched as the leadership in my church, their minds exploded, because first of all, that wasn't their vision for the church. They just wanted to not close. Uh,
Right.
they weren't on board with being a mega church because they didn't know what that meant. They just knew it
Right.
wasn't something they had signed up for. And
Mm-hmm.
when you have 120, they don't see becoming a mega church as being realistic. They thought I was crazy. Uh, so I'm like, okay, so that didn't really work, and that plan got rejected as I'm. You ever see something when you're doing something and it dies in front of you? I mean, that's
Oh,
kind of that's what this vision did. It literally died
like,
as I'm presenting it.
oh, you knew, like, when you're saying those words and you're reading the room, you're just like, okay, this is over. I'm
Yeah,
just
it's not going
wrapping
well. Yeah.
it
So my next opportunity, I went to another church in Milwaukee, and I walked in, and they didn't really have a vision either. And I'm like, okay, I learned my lesson. I say, we're gonna take this slow, and they came to me and said, I said, let's start the process, and we'll get leadership on board. And we started talking about vision and where we were going, and the leaders drove this pace of the change, and they
Okay.
wanted to move faster and they wanted to go. So that one actually worked well. And we set up a very grandiose vision, and we had a 7-year, 10-year timeline to accomplish this vision. We actually accomplished it in 7 years.
Amazing.
And then I was like, okay, I either have to do this again or I need to leave, because I had to either commit 10 more years to the next vision, or I have to leave. And so
Right.
I ended up leaving that ministry, but we had a really powerful vision. Our vision was to get people in God's word and to really be a church for that community. So we were actually able to be there for some very difficult times in that church's history, that community's history. We had some shootings in the area. Our men got involved in a Bible study for the first time in their lives. They've been trying to start a men's Bible study for decades. We
Mhm.
got one going. It lasted 15 years. And the women started saying, hey, if the men have a Bible study, why can't we have one? So I went from a church that had literally 4 people in Bible class to one that had 60 in Bible class.
Amazing.
at that time when I left, and we had multiple mini groups in Bible class. So we became a church that was really in God's word, and that was a big part of the vision for us to do that. We had 20 baptisms from our school one year, uh, from non-church members. So we started seeing the fruits of God working through us to become a blessing to that community.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that is amazing. And you therefore decided to do the doctorate program. And once you were in the program, you were like, okay, I am going to continue to work on this thing that I started, which
Right.
has ended up with us being here, sitting here, and hopefully blessing a lot of church leaders.
Yeah, I hope so. And I wanted to make sure I didn't just focus on my church body. So I wanted to expand this to have other churches involved as well. So I had 174 Lutheran LCMS churches, but I had almost 40 non LCMS churches involved, from Wisconsin Synod to Holiness churches to Methodist churches to 9 mega churches that partnered. So it was good to kind of get the change perspective from a wide variety of churches and
Mhm.
sizes and leadership styles too.
Mhm. So, what was the actual purpose of that research, and what did you find?
The purpose was really Cotter has not been tried a lot in churches, and when it has been tried, the one Methodist group person that tried it tried to switch the orders of Cotter, see if you did the change in different orders, if it made an impact. And I'm like, I don't know why you would change the order of it, because I'm like, I'm not sure what you would do to change it to improve it. And so that didn't really go as well. There was a study among the Seventh Day Adventists,
Mhm.
um, trying to see if Cotter worked with their church polity, but
Mhm.
there was never one that was done across denominations to see how Cotter could be utilized in the Christian church setting in a way to help them actually change or do organizational change. Many people have used parts of Cotter, but they've not maybe used Cotter as the change model.
Mhm. I see that. Okay, cool. So, what did you find?
Well, I found, and I also wanted to add to this study, what impact does certain leadership styles have with Cotter? So I tested 5 leadership styles.
That's.
Charismatic,
Mhm.
which charismatic is defined as someone who's self-confident, clear, compelling vision, popular, motivational, skilled communicator. Then I
Mhm.
also tested servant leaders. We define this kind of with humility, a person of character, compassionate, puts people first, is a sacrificial, and leads by example. And then I added transformational. Those are growth mindset people, collaborative investing, equipping, empowering others. Then I added authoritative leaders who believe in rapid change, decisive, bring clarity, chain of command, and very goal focused and powerful. And then I also added skill based, which is values accomplishment, emphasizes training, competency, division of labor, rewards success, and encourages organizational balance. So those were the 5 styles. And I really was anticipating that servant leaders would be the epicenter of the best change leaders.
Mhm.
What I found was they did okay, but transformational leaders actually did better at every single stage of Cotter than any other group of those
Mhm.
leadership styles.
Mhm.
The one that did the worst among all those was authoritative. They
Mhm.
consistently rated at the lowest end of the Cotter change model and struggled mightily with the whole change process.
Mhm.
Charismatic, which actually is really narcissistic, but I don't want to call it that because I'm just going to check I'm a narcissistic leader on this survey. Um, they performed pretty well, especially in the early stages where you talk about vision and communication, because they could propel the vision by the power of their personality.
Mhm.
Uh, Narcissistic leaders are also misunderstood because they, like transformational, do empower other people, but
Mhm.
they empower other people with the idea that now I need you to kind of thank me for empowering you. so, so they do empower people. They want you to kind of, scratch their back and say, "Oh, you're so wonderful. I'm so glad
Right.
you poured into me," kind of thing. They need that constant ego boost.
Mhm. So is it that is it's interesting because it's not a bad thing to thank somebody for doing something, but it's
Right,
almost like for them, without that, the world almost crumbles, right? Like they
right,
need it, like they depend on it. You have to give it to them, or else the world kind of crumbles.
right.
That's
They,
interesting.
yeah, they can become very, very hard to deal with if they don't get that constant stroking and
Hmm.
encouragement from their followers.
Hmm. You know, I did find that fascinating with the seven leaders, because when I was in school, that I did a lot of reading and I wrote a paper, which in short is basically a nonprofit in crisis. I'm gonna link it in this video, but I I came to that conclusion that after reading a lot and listening to one respected leadership professor that was my professor, I I strongly believed, before I even saw your research, I strongly believed that servant leadership is will not function as highly as transformational leadership, right? So when I saw your work, based on that one paper I read, and based on just looking at the different leadership styles, I and my conviction from looking at them, I was able to just get connected to what you were saying, because I was like, yes, somebody's validating something that I've believed in a while. So servant leadership is great, and the people that really hold on to servant leadership, and the thing that I would like to encourage people that are servant leaders is to be able to find a balance between taking care of themselves, because when people think they're servant leaders, they sometimes forget to do self-care.
Right,
So it's important for those who hold on to servant leadership to do self-care, and it's also important for those who do servant leadership to make sure the people around them that serve with them also do self-care, because sometimes there is that oversight where you're serving, and you start to expect other people to serve exactly like you, and you slightly move from being the servant leader to pace setter. And pace setter, for me, I believe that I was in that place where I had merged servant leader with pace setter, and I was pushing. So I would just, let's go, let's go, let's go, let's go. I wasn't breathing, I wasn't giving people room to breathe. I'll take a project and I would just drive, right?
right.
And I had to stop. I had to stop and say, what is the best leadership for me? And I realized another thing too is that I was moving from leadership style to leadership style. There are times where I would be in this pace setting mindset, then I would be servant leadership mindset. And then I kind of sat between those two, and I concluded I need to sit in the transformational leadership style. And when it's necessary, I could move to pace setter. I could combine the styles. So that was my conclusion. Like, it's not saying that because transformational leadership is the best leadership style, or the one that research is supporting, that everybody must sit in that at all times. I think that sometimes it would be good, depending on the situation, to slide into another leadership style and slide into another one that is working best for that situation, but always finding your center where you work the best as a leader.
I
What?
wonder if Collins level 5 leader is more transformational than servant. I think we've always assumed level 5 was servant, but
Mm-hmm.
as I look at how level 5 is defined by Collins, it's probably more transformational because it really is about empowering others. Because if you look at that video, I mean the picture he paints of that, of the leader who looks in the mirror and
Mm-hmm.
gives thinks about other people who've done it, not himself, which is a
Right.
narcissistic kind of one. Looks at it and goes, "Oh, I did this."
I did
Um,
this.
yeah. the servant, I think, well, the servant leaders maybe struggle in transform in my survey of change is, I think when you have pushback and there's conflict and there are barriers, the servant leader, because of his compassion and putting people first, I think struggles to deal with the conflict more
Mm,
than the
mm,
transformational leader does. Because
correct.
the transformational leader who's empowering other people have other people to also, maybe with different skills and different gifts, who can now step up and help deal with some of the stuff that pops up with the barriers. But the servant leader has to, if he's leading by example, he's got to be the one who figures out all the ways to solve the conflict and teach other people how to do that too, as opposed to letting those people develop that skill for themselves. So
That is a brilliant observation. I think that is a really brilliant observation right there. And there is this, growing up in the church, I was confronted at one point with this question: have you prepared somebody else to take your place?
right.
You're really good at this, but have you prepared somebody else to take your place? And that really stayed with me throughout my life. Like, I was in my teens at that time, and I taught Sunday school and things like that. And that question came up, and having that servant leadership, if you felt like, oh, I need to do it, that way, the example, I'm showing the example, I've been called to serve. And but with that transformational order mindset, you're empowering them, you're preparing them to be the leaders for when you need that rest that I was talking about in the servant leadership. If you don't prepare the leaders, then you won't have the confidence to allow them to step into you while you go take rest. So
Yeah,
I
it's funny if you think about that famous leadership thing. I teach you. No, I do it first, then I show you, and then you show you. The whole thing, and it ends up being then you do it.
mm,
We assume that that's a servant leader model, but I don't think it is. I think it's a transformational leader model.
it is. Mm-hmm.
And but we tell people it's servant leadership, and I think where people struggle is that of I teach you and then you do it, and I watch you. I don't know if servant leaders have an easier time letting them do it and then watching them.
Very true. Very true. You nailed it. You nailed it. No, you actually have touched a really, really delicate point, that sometimes those that are not, like, if you're a follower, because sometimes us as leaders, we have to be followers. So we don't, like, the leadership, you're looking at the leadership as a follower, and you're thinking, okay, why is it that they're not just letting this other person do it? But why is that they're not just letting me do it? He's already trained me, I know how to do it. But it's that struggle. It's that struggle. They haven't, they really struggle with that. And I appreciate transformational leadership. Therefore, for that reason, communicating that understanding, because once they know that they doing it is actually letting somebody else, it's almost like a service at the same time. It's
Right.
almost like you fool their brain that way. Since their brains are not wired that way, maybe that can fool their brain. But it is a struggle, and I'm so happy you acknowledge it, and I'm so happy you pointed it out, because we need to also have compassion when we see things like that. We shouldn't think the person just wants to hog power and not let go. It is a struggle. It's change, and change is not easy. Change
Right.
is not.
Exactly.
Oh, you mentioned a couple of things. There's something I want to go back to diversity, equity, inclusion that you mentioned. That is something that not the church doesn't quite know how to embrace that, right? And when we talked about diversity in the beginning, you were bringing it in the context of diversifying people in the church, diversifying skills in the church. I wonder, though, is there a place for racial diversity, for cultural diversity in the church? like because I have also been in big churches, and I have been in big churches where I have seen the leadership, all of the leadership, not representing anybody that looks like me or us, and there's a bunch of us in the church, and there was nobody in leadership that looked like us. So is there a place for diversity, such diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging, that understanding of belonging in the church, in these concepts? Is there a place for these concepts in the church, in your experience and in just your opinion?
When I talk about DEI, or especially that when it comes to church, I said don't use that term as a church because it doesn't really fit our church culture. What I say you should use is the term community. Because
Mm-hmm.
what sometimes diversity, equity, and inclusion does is it says, look at me, I'm different,
Mm-hmm.
so I can belong.
Mm-hmm.
Versus community says, hey, we're all different, we're all unique, but we're called upon to be united as something bigger than ourselves, something outside of ourselves. So I think what the church struggles with is I tell people, especially churches that are mostly one homogeneous subgroup,
Right.
that
Mm-hmm.
it's hard for a person of color to join a church like that when there's no one who looks like me, like you just said. And they say, well, why don't he just come and be the first? I'm like, nobody wants to be Jackie Robinson in your church.
It's
It's
exhausting.
exhausting to be Jackie Robinson. Um, but I said it's important that if you want your church to look different and to be diverse, then you have to go out and intentionally say, and not in a token way, but how can I make sure that the people who are leading worship up front look like the people in our community? So that means that we look for people intentionally and in leadership who bring a diverse voice, a diverse culture. And I said it's like this: when people come into your family, you can't control who your kids marry, and they're not going to always marry people that you necessarily want or like or even you're used to. But as the way our family tries to do that is, like, I use the Thanksgiving dinner for example. As a leader of the household, I say I'll take care of the meat, and you and the new family members can pick a dish that you want to add to the meal. So we might have a turkey with tacos, with egg rolls, with all kinds of other things that typically would not be a Thanksgiving meal, because the meal is now about all of us bringing our best to the meal, to the table. If the church viewed that as well too, like what does it look like for everybody to bring their unique traditions and gifts and background to the celebration? Our Christmas might look a little different. Our songs might be different. Our worship may be different, but it's about being inclusive to include me learning how to dance, your dance, and appreciating the fact that you dance differently than I do. And so the church has to be willing to say, I'm willing to learn your dance, and I'm willing to share my dance with you, and maybe we'll develop a new dance altogether from our two cultures coming together.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think as church leaders today, it is a very, it's a very delicate, it's a very delicate. Maybe it has always been. Maybe it has always been, but maybe for me, it's coming to the forefront more. The struggle of understanding the challenges that go beyond the surface level of I am black and you are maybe white, Hispanic, somebody else, right? Um, and I basically think that the historical factors are coming to the forefront more. And because the whole historical factors are coming in the forefront more, the church, which is considered a place of community, like you said, a place of love, a place of acceptance, is struggling with defining um, things in a way that is not controversial outside of the church, or the outsider might find these things controversial. One being, for example, an example being, not all churches are going to bring in somebody that is have a different gender identity because of how the Bible principles are laid. But there's in this. This is something I have to be extremely careful saying, because the church is welcoming of everybody. There are just some things that are so unique to the Bible that some churches won't compromise, and some churches have compromised so that people can feel like they belong. And I think that a lot of churches struggle with this kind of change because they want to hold on to the Bible as is, right? And then other people are defining community in this broad DI perspective, where it's saying you're supposed to marry me. It doesn't matter who I choose to marry, you're supposed to marry me. And then some of the churches are like, no, our principles, our culture doesn't accept that. And then you're saying, well, I want to be a part of community. I want to be here. I can be part of community if you don't adjust in this way and that way and that way. And it is a struggle. And it's causing the church fear, because now the church is seeing their values kind of washed out in the name of change, right? So I, I, as I qualified it in the beginning, that you're working on change based on biblical principles, and you're not working on change in a way that is out to completely throw out the culture of the church. Because I've also heard people that are saying, my mission is to change the church, right? So there is the soul of the church. Just as I am an African. I am American, but I am an African. There's just some core things to me as an African that I would really be extremely upset if somebody tried to take that away from me. So, and I would expect everybody to respect those core things about me that is African. And I'm saying this to make sure that for those listeners that hold some of the views that I just mentioned, that they too understand the struggle that is in this for everybody, because the church is a culture of its own also, and there's new culture coming in, but at the same time, we all have to respect each other's culture. And it is something that we as Christians, we're constantly struggling with. You know how the servant leader is struggling to serve and give power to the other, and that's why we're saying let's do transformational leadership. This is a struggle for the church. This is a struggle for many Christians. There's so many things that is a struggle. Like today, African Christians are struggling with the idea of colonization and having missionaries that have colonial mindsets, right? That is a struggle. And there are those that are advocating for spirituality, the African spirituality over Christianity. So there is a lot of struggle. There's a lot of struggle. And as we aim to create community, I really believe that we should not take it lightly, that it goes beyond just being able to sit around the same table. It goes beyond this historical, it goes too deeper into these historical factors these differences, these nuances in society. And I just want to encourage us to really hold on to respect as we create community, whether we're respecting people's history, whether we're respecting people's background, whether we're respecting people's beliefs, whether we are respecting the beliefs of the church community, because you gave a vision to a church that was like, yikes, we don't want to be big. We just want to stay open, right? So we have to have respect. You weren't sitting there forcing them. Jesus said we should go out and bring in people. You didn't say that. You respected where they were and you walked away and you went somewhere else and you were successful with the mission. You learned from that and you were successful somewhere else and you will keep being successful. So this whole rant that I just went on is just to open up different thoughts and just to cater to those people that might have diversity views that don't align with the church. Any thoughts?
I think as I think about what you just said, the church has to understand that it can't compromise its truth to make someone feel comfortable, because
Yes.
then you're no longer a church anymore. If you have biblical views, those have to guide the core of who you are. Because sacrificing your truth to make someone happy ultimately doesn't make any of you happy. You think about it in a relationship. If you marry somebody and you stop being who you are because you want to marry that person, so you all of a sudden you say maybe you were an athlete. All of a sudden, it's like, well, I'm going to be a baker now because you don't like me being athletic. Then you live your entire life baking. You may become very good at baking, but you're never really happy because your true core of who you are was this, and now you've changed it to make someone else happy. And then
Correct.
they can't figure out why you're unhappy in the role of being a baker. Well, it's like, because you were never meant to bake.
Mm-hmm.
So I think what we got to be careful of is we don't want to compromise truth for the sake of saying inclusion, because that's not helpful for anybody. My approach to some of the issues in our culture is we speak the truth. We allow the word of God to transform hearts. We don't do that. God does that.
Mm-hmm.
But he doesn't do that if you compromise the core of who he is and what he stands for.
Yeah.
So the change that we talk about is change of the organization that is not based on biblical foundations, but based on operating. If you're doing something that's not working, you want to do something differently.
Different.
Keep driving a car that the oil's running out of. Eventually, the car is going to break. So, but the love part of it is God's called us to love, and
Amen.
we still have to love people. We still have to have conversations with people. I do that a lot. I talk to people I don't necessarily agree with on my podcast because we learn from each other, and I'm very respectful of them and they're respectful of me. It proves to people that you can have a conversation with somebody you disagree with as
Right.
long as you're both respectful. And you can
Yes.
walk away and say, I understand your point. I hope you understand my point of view. And maybe we can walk away as friends and have a deeper conversation down the road. But cutting people off and never having that conversation doesn't help the church and society to wrestle with very difficult issues.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I do agree 100%. And that respect is very critical. And the respect is from both individuals, from the person that agrees and the person that disagrees, right? Because we society tend to do this thing that if you don't agree with me, then you're not with me. That's not true. I can disagree with you and still love you and still care deeply about you and still be there for you when you need me. I don't have to completely agree with everything you say and do for me to be your friend or for me to respect you, for me to like you, for me to serve you. So this respect is absolutely crucial, and I'm glad that you insisted on that point. um this common saying, people say that's your truth, that's my truth. It's another way of just saying I respect your opinion, you respect my opinion, right? Like if you want to say that's your truth, fine, that's my truth, but do you respect it? Will you still let me love you? Will you still let me serve you? Will you still let me be your friend? I don't have to agree with you because I'm holding on to this truth, and you should also respect it. Don't come into my home, into my beliefs, and try to just rip everything apart. If I invite you, that's okay.
Right.
Just
Right.
ripping it apart, and just because there is something else that just came up, like DIB just came up. Now we need to like just tear everything and throw it out. That that doesn't really work. That just causes division. And I appreciate you for saying that. I
Yeah.
appreciate you very much for saying that. It is quite a struggle. It is quite a struggle, and um, I do pray for our communities. I do pray for the people that you serve. I do pray for the people that I may encounter that might have different views, that I will continue to love, that I pray for them and I pray for me, that I will continue to love, I will continue to support, I will continue to encourage, but that I will stay true to who I am, to the beliefs that I hold, and that I will stay true to the understandings that I have been blessed with. And
Yeah, I mean, that's all critical because if we can as a society disagree and even have a conversation, then we're gonna just go to our camps and we're gonna describe the other person's enemy. And then it really gets dangerous because when the other person's the enemy and not a person, then I don't value their life or who they are or what they represent. And then it becomes a very dangerous society. If I
Mhm,
see you as less than human, that's
mhm.
my concern about us going to our individual camps and saying those people are bad over there and these people over here are okay. Because no, we're all created by the same God. Um, so we're all
And we're,
valuable to His precious to Him.
amen. And we're all human. We're all human.
Right.
So yeah. I think we do forget that. It's a common saying. We're all human, but we do forget that sometimes. We do
Yeah.
forget. I don't know. My heart is heavy, but it is satisfied. It is full because I believe that today we have touched on things that are not commonly touched upon, and I want to thank you for your grace and for your willingness to hit on tough conversations. The goal was to just talk about your dissertation and the work you've
Right.
done and the work you do in the church. But I thank you for being open to just dialoguing a little bit more about hot issues in our society and our community. Um, do you have any last words? Anything that is important for you to say? You're welcome to say a prayer for our community, for our society, for the issues we've touched on. Anything that your heart is pressed on to say or do. I'm giving you the room.
Yeah, I challenge my kids sometime to send me a verse that is particularly meaningful to them or maybe even problematic. And it was funny because my son sent me one about joy and pain and the role of joy and pain in our life. And it hit me that as I looked at that verse, it is that the pain was there to strengthen us, not to destroy us. And I think sometimes I see our world going through so much right now, so much pain, so much suffering, so much anxiety. And I think God's doing something in our society and in us to refine us, not to break us. And I would just encourage people who feel discouraged, who feel that their heart is heavy, that these times are more intense than ever before, to know that we're not alone and that God walks with us through this journey and we will never be without his care and his presence and his son in our life, and to receive that gift from God, because the days ahead might be difficult, but God's grace still goes before us. And so I'd encourage people to kind of tap in and dive into deeper into God's grace and let him surround you with his love and with his compassion.
Thank you so much, Reverend Dr. Keith Haney, for this time together.
Well,
Thank
thanks for
you.
having me.
You're welcome.